Occasionally I've pulled out of subjects because I found them too difficult. Maybe I had heavy work commitments as well. Occasionally I've failed subjects. Nevertheless, these are fairly unusual events, so this is quite an unusual event for me today, to be facing up to the fact that within a week I may drop this subject. The reason is that I'm finding it excruciatingly difficult. If the lecturer had given less constraint as to what we had to do for our assignment, I would have been happy to write a 50-page booklet expounding on my ideas. Instead of which, we've got a fault tree exercise, and to me it's rather meaningless. I've done what I think is required, so maybe I should just hand it in and say, listen, I want some marks for it, but it's entirely up to you how you mark it. It's entirely up to you. I want some marks for it, but it's entirely up to you how you break it down. I'm then putting myself under tremendous pressure over the next 4 weeks to write another essay. But the reason why I think I can get away with writing it is that I've got a meaning. I've actually got some meaning in what I'm doing. Suddenly found the first 3 assignments pretty meaningless. But I've actually got some meaning now, because what I'm trying to believe, what I'm believing with all my heart, is that, let's see what I've written down here, that we can derive a design by analysis of a requirement statement. So when we look at a requirement statement, suddenly we're looking at some grammar. Now, it seems to me that an analysis is to go back from the grammar to generate a hypothetical set of attributes that we're working with. So maybe we don't need any structure. If you're working back into the what the depths are in the brain, we may or may not need a structure. Maybe we just need a list of attributes. So maybe our requirement that's written out, say in 20 words, maybe that's only a surface representation of 100 attributes out of a much bigger number that could have been chosen. So maybe 100 attributes out of, I'm only guessing, maybe a list of 200 were chosen, and that gave us a particular requirement. Now this is starting not to sound very plausible, what I'm saying. I'm thinking that a much better way of understanding what's going on with our mathematical model is that things happen, that objects interact. So in our mathematical model we actually have objects interacting. Surely this is a way then of clarifying, giving an understanding of what we mean when we're writing out requirements for an AETU. So when we say that the plane is not to be damaged, we mean that we keep parameters within certain defined limits. Parameters are within defined limits. They're somehow defined on a map. Perhaps that we're given a map that tells us the region that we're required to stay in for these parameters. Perhaps it's a region in three-dimensional space, or the dimensions might be, for example, revolutions per minute, the engine. What are some other possible parameters? Fuel rate and air rate. Let's just look at those 3. Fuel rate, air rate, RPM. So we'll look at those. Fuel rate, well, it's a 3-dimensional map that we have here then. So we're being limited to some particular regions of this map. Some are unsafe. Let's just assume that some of those values would be unsafe. There's a lot of guesswork here as to what we're supposed to do if we get unsafe values. Which of these things can we lessen? For example, how do you lessen the fuel rate? How do you lessen the air rate? How do you lessen the RPM? Have we got these controls offered to us? Or maybe it's a throttle. Maybe the device that we're offered is a throttle that handles all of those three. Now, I see a huge problem in doing the simulation on the ground, because if we're trying to simulate a plane taking off, how do you simulate the load on the engine? When, for example, let's just say, for example, you gave the engine the task of playing the task of rising vertically. I doubt if any commercial airliner is able to do that. But how would you test such a thing on the ground? How would you test it? I have no idea how you would test such a thing. The only thing I can think of is that maybe there's some way of measuring the thrust from the plane, and you could convert that to a calculation of the plane moving vertically. My thoughts also were that we want to have an agent that can build a fault tree. So let's come down and try and just write down some very tiny requirements. These are just very, very tiny requirements for the engine. So maybe they are, after all, encapsulated in the fault tree. Maybe the fault tree is just giving us a little bit of experience in a tiny bit of reasoning. Maybe that's all it's meant to do, is just give us a tiny little bit of experience in manually trying to maybe draw a couple of conclusions. Maybe it goes without saying that we're expecting to have an automated system that will do these things.